Hi everyone, my name is Jory LaFrance and I come from the Apsalagan Nation in southeastern Montana, and I'm very, very happy to be speaking about a little bit of research we've been doing on the Crow Reservation. Specifically, I'll be talking about Crow people, community health, and climate change. Here's a little bit of an overview. I'll be starting off by laying the landscape, talking about crow land loss and theft. Then I'll roll right into being beluga, Montana grown, and a little bit about my PhD journey. Then I'll talk about the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee, which will lead us into a article that we published called Change Rippling Through Waters and Culture. And that will talk about a climate change study that we did here on the reservation, interviewing elders. And then I'll lead into the heart work and what we're doing to address some of the challenges that we currently face. So to start off, I'm sure most of you have seen this map. This map shows what land was like before colonization. And you can see that we took up most of Indian country. Um, you can see in the Great Plains area, Crow country is right in the middle here, taking up most of Montana and Wyoming. And this is what a map looks like of the reservations today. And we are very, very grateful as Beluga, as Apsalaga, as Crow people to still inhabit the land that our ancestors were the original stewards of. And so our reservation is located, like I mentioned, in southeastern Montana. Our reservation is the largest in Montana and the fifth largest in the United States. And this QR code you can scan to it'll take you to a website that will show you whose traditional homeland you stand on. I love to use that map. Everywhere I go, you're standing on traditional homelands of Indigenous people. So I just wanted to start off with that map. And then this map here is showing the original territory of the Apsalagan Nation. And so we identify our homelands by these four base poles. We have a chief. His name was Owe Kulawaja, which means sits in the middle of the land. And he used the four base poles of our teepees. Crow people use four poles. Other tribes use different numbers of poles, but for us, we use four. And he identified our landscape by the East Pole reaching the Black Hills, the South Pole reaching the Wind River Mountains, the West Pole reaching the Beartooth Mountains, and then the North Pole towards the Milk River, towards the Bear Paw Mountains. So you can see that covered area in this light gray color on the map on the right side. So we went from 38 million acres to present day 2.3 million acres, which is that dark area that you see, which is our current day reservation. So you can see that our territory was expansive and it covered a large percentage of Montana and Wyoming. I just want to really emphasize the importance and the privilege and the fortunate opportunity that our people still get to live on the same homelands. It means the world to me that our people fought hard to protect our homelands, and we're still be able to still be here today, doing the same thing. And that is just something that is near and dear to my heart. So I talked about a little bit of the crow land loss and the theft. We call it a daluk, meaning like stilling land. And so this list of dates and policies and laws that I have here are just the major ways and pathways that the federal government took our land. And so the first treaty that was signed between Crow people and the United States government was in 1825. And so treaties, and specifically the dates of treaties, are really important because that's when the federal government really recognized our sovereignty, and really that set the stage for water rights, for land rights, property rights. So these treaty dates are really important. And the first treaty that was made between Crow people and the federal government was in 1825. And I'm sure most of you know about the Fort Laramie treaties that involved multiple tribes, my tribe being one of them. There was two signings of those treaties, the first one being in 1851 and the second in 1868. And then you think about residential schools and how that impacted the Apsalagat people, not only our people, but all indigenous nations. Indigenous people were severely impacted by the taking of our youth and putting them into residential schools with the rhetoric of save the man, kill the Indian, and they did everything they could to civilize our native people. And so the first wave of our youth being sent away was around the late 70s. And as we move forward, there's other dates, policies, acts that occurred that took our land. And so our area where we live, we're known to have some of the most fertile soil and a lot of agricultural activity. A lot of people made their way to this area so they can grow crops, so they can also mine. So we had a lot of external influences coming from all directions to our territory, and we had to fight really hard to maintain what we had. And then as we go throughout time, even going to the 1920 Crow Act, even when we were put on reservations, there were still different ways that they used to take our homelands. The Dawes Allotment Act was a huge influence on the taking of our lands. On this right side, this is actually a pretty famous poster. This poster was used to advertise the selling of lands. And so this was a result of the Dawes Allotment Act. And you can see in the circle, the red circle, it's very small. But Crow Agency, the Crow area, is the only nation in Montana where they were selling our lands. And they were looking to sell about 11,000 acres. And so this was just really a tactic in a way for the federal government and for settlers to come and settle in our area. And we have a very heavily checkerboarded reservation, and it's a result of these different ways that I just mentioned that allowed for settlers to come and settle on our homelands. And so checkerboarded reservations is a really important term, especially when it comes to land access, property rights, water rights, everything. Basically, it impacts everything we do on the Crow Reservation. And so that's a little bit about the landscape itself. A little bit more about me. My name is Joy LaFrance. Balaja Ijin Machlashuk. Bazamlachia bi Urishik Delan Kombi Chukak Chabagarik. My Apsalagan name is Eugene Machlish, and it means fortunate with horses, and it was given to me by the late Sue Takes Horse. I'm Greasy Mouth, and I'm a child of the Ties of Bundle. I was raised in the Mighty Feud district, and I also come from the River Crow and Mountain Crow bands. I am 30 years old and I am very, very, very proud to come from my families. I'm proud to be Upsaluga. And so I usually use this slide to introduce myself because it kind of encapsulates everything that I am. So I usually start with the top left corner in the quadrant I call Amalakbaga, which means like family or like who I come from. I come from really amazing families. I'm a white clay, I'm a tobacco, a horn, bear claw, LaFrance, good eagle, noses gun, and a Harris. And so these families are really, really important to me because it had it not been for them, I would not be here today. I have a twin sister. Her name is Taylor. Love her with all that I am, and so very glad I've been able to live my life with a friend, a sister, a partner since the day I was born. I am a granddaughter of Francis Bearclaw and Joanne Horn, who I had the opportunity to live with for the majority of my life. Those are my great grandparents. I'm a direct descendant from Chief Pretty Eagle, and I'm very, very proud to come from his lineage. And I also have a partner, my fiance, Talon Lone Bear, who is my main partner in life, my partner in crime. We make a very good team, and I'm very happy to walk this life with him and go through this journey. And so moving over to the right to Imagikator. Imagikator means to have respect for all beings. And for me, this is the center of who I am. All the work that I do, all of my hard work, my academic work, my personal life, everything goes back to giving back to my own people. And so I am a graduate from Dartmouth College. I was a double major in Earth Sciences and Native American Studies. And then I had the opportunity to work with the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee between undergrad and graduate school. I had that opportunity to learn more about water quality, learn more about the research that has been going on the Crow Reservation. And that's where I really found out that there was a need for understanding the Little Bighorn River itself, meaning surface water quality. And so I applied to graduate school, and thankfully, I got into the University of Arizona, specifically the Department of Environmental Science, where I am working on my PhD. And my dissertation research focuses on the concentration discharge relationship of the Little Bighorn River. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But that's who I am in that right quadrant. So making our way around, going to the Beluga. Beluga means our side. So you'll hear me use Beluga, Upsaluga, and Crow interchangeably. We call ourselves Beluga, we call ourselves Upsaluga, and then we call ourselves Crow. Crow is actually a mistranslation, but that's a story for another time. But that's the way the federal government does recognize us. So I'll use those terms interchangeably. And so Beluga, our side, I love to do work in my community, whether that's civic engagement, whether that's working with youth or the women in my community. I've done many different projects. I run the Biwat Chajak Collective. I run the Ilia Itchik Indigenous Correspondence Program, which is actually a national program, and it's an environmental storytelling program in partnership with George Washington University, and the University of Arizona's Indigenous Resilience Center. I've worked in museums. I love working with the artists in my life, also artists on my reservation. I've done a number of creative projects. I also am very dedicated to healing and the healing in my community. I also love to travel the world, and so I've had the opportunity to travel to Mongolia, to Italy, New Zealand, and I've just been very fortunate to be able to experience these things, but everything always leads back home, which brings me to the last quadrant, Ajay Cha, which means good home. Everything that I do is to give back, is to have a good home. Everything that I've worked for has been to return home back to Crow Country to do the good work. I'm a strong, strong believer in that we deserve good. We deserve to thrive in our own community, and I am working towards creating opportunity, creating resources, and creating ways for us to thrive here at home. And of course, everything is for our younger generation, for the next leaders that will be taking on these roles. And so, collectively, this is who I am. I am very, very proud to come from where I come from. This is just a snapshot. I've always been a horse person. I come from families who have really old parade sets. We have a green set and a red set. My great grandma Joanne Horn was given this elk tooth dress, which is a one of a kind dress. It has elk teeth going all the way down to the bottom, and I'm very fortunate to be a generation and a descendant to still be using these items today, and I am so, so, so proud to wear this dress and to be able to parade with our sets every single year. And I just wanted to share this with you because this is who I am and where I feel my best. And so I always take this slide with me wherever I go, whenever I present, because these are my ancestors. These are the people that I come from. These are the people who have sacrificed, who have worked, who have done everything they can to provide opportunity for their descendants. My great grandma Joanne Horn, who is here in this top, the second to the right top photo, and then my great grandpa Francis Bearclaw. My direct grandparents are Joe Whiteclay and the late Bernadette Bearclaw. And then I have my other family members pictured here as well. And so I love the people I come from, and I am very, very proud to carry not only Apsaluga blood, but I also carry Northern Cheyenne and Sitsica blood. Sitsica is from Alberta, Canada, and I get that from my paternal side. So I always share this photo. I always share these photos because these are the people that I come from, and I'm very, very proud. So shifting into more of my research, I study the Little Bighorn River watershed. The Little Bighorn River starts in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, flows about 11 miles north where it hits the Montana-Wyoming state line, which is also the Crow Reservation line. And the total length of the river is about 142 miles, where it eventually meets the Bighorn River on the northern end of our reservation near Hardin, Montana. And so I study this river because it's been a river I've grown up along my entire life. I don't quite remember the first memory of this river because it's been a part of me and part of who I am for so long. I lived right next to the river. I mean, I could wake up every morning when I would wait for the bus. I could hear the flow of the river itself, and you could feel the cool temperature coming off the river. And I always had this idea that this river was the most pristine, not knowing what actually was going on. And so it wasn't until I started becoming more engaged in research and understanding more of the environmental aspect that the river isn't as clean as I thought. And so that's where I wanted to focus much of my research on this Little Bighorn River, specifically surface water quality. And I have two sample locations where I placed XO2 SON sensors in the river. I have sample one location, which is towards the headwaters of the river, and that comes right out of the Little Bighorn River Canyon from the mountains where it hits the reservation line. And then I have a second location towards the end of the river where the confluence is. And so I chose these two locations not only to compare them, but because there are USGS gauge stations located at these areas. And so I bring together XO2 SON sensor data, USGS gauge station data, along with analytical chemistry data, where I collect samples, send those samples to the lab, and that is where we work in the lab to detect what's in the river itself. This is the Little Bighorn River being used by our ancestors. These are really old photos of our people using this river, so you can see it's always been a part of our lives. We're known to camp along the rivers. One of our bands is called River Crow, Beneza Pela, where we're known to be along the river itself. And so I wanted to show that we've been using this river for many, many generations, and we're still very fortunate to be along this river. I call this river the lifeline of our nation, the bloodline of our people, because it's the only river that begins in the Bighorn Mountains and ends at the Bighorn River, where this river is in full responsibility of Apsalalooke people. Whereas the Bighorn River, which is a much larger and longer river, many other stakeholders rely on that river, where the majority of the stakeholders that rely on the Little Bighorn River are Apsalalooke people. However, there are other stakeholders. I mentioned the checkerboarded reservations. You have non-tribal members who are also utilizing this river in different ways. But for the most part, this river is in full responsibility of us. And so this is what the river looks like today. And I am still so, so thankful to be able to live along this river that's always been a part of my life. And so for the research that I do, I mentioned the concentration discharge relationship. And so essentially that means that I'm trying to understand how different pollutants are behaving as the water flow changes throughout the year. So the Little Bighorn River has a typical snowmelt hydrograph, meaning that in the winter we have our lower flows because we have snowpack, we have ice, so the river isn't as high. But as temperatures start to warm, rainfall starts to come, the river starts to fill up with higher flows, runoff starts to begin, um, and then we start to hit our peak discharge where everything's melted, we get rain, groundwater is feeding into the river, and the river is pretty high. And our peak discharge is usually around June, July, where the river is just roaring. And then with the use of the river and having less precipitation, the water's flowing, that river does eventually start to go down. And then we start to go into the fall time where we're using the river for agriculture. And the water is being taken. And so the river is really starting to dwindle down until we hit the recharge point, which happens in October. That's according to the hydrologic new year. And so we start to get into this base flow again, where we get into that winter time where the river is at its lowest flow. And so that's what a typical snowmelt hydrograph looks like. And because of these changes of the water flow, I want to understand how different pollutants and contaminants are behaving as a result of these water flow changes. So that meant taking water samples weekly. I had help from interns, not only family members, but students, Crow students who collected samples for me. And then we sent those samples to the University of Arizona, where we then were able to analyze those in the lab. And then I mentioned that I put sensors in the river itself. Those sensors are collecting your typical parameters like temperature, conductivity, pH, dissolved organic matter, and then we also have a nitrate sensor as well. So those samples, once we receive them from Montana after they're overnighted, we get them in the lab where we do the sample prep, and then we go through a multi-step process to actually read the samples itself. And some of the contaminants that I'm looking at are your major anions, your major cations, but I've started to develop a interest and a focus in man-made compounds like PFAS. So we have detected PFAS. My lab is able to measure up to 25 compounds, which is just a very, very small amount of the amount of compounds that are out there. There's thousands of compounds, but my lab is able to detect up to 25 of them, which is actually pretty good compared to a lot of other labs. And so my laboratory goes through the necessary steps to be able to measure those. And I work in the Arizona Laboratory for Emerging Contaminants, where all of these samples are eventually run. So that's a little bit about my research. I was very, very motivated to do that research because of my work with the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee. So the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee, which I will call the Steering Committee, started about 20 years ago in 2005. They are a grassroots team. They use Little Bighorn College as their fiscal sponsor. And then we have a research partner at Montana State University, Bozeman. Dr. Margaret Eggers is our research partner who has been with this team for a long while. I only joined the team in 2017 after I graduated from Dartmouth. And much of their focus was really on private wells, trying to understand the the impact of water quality to community health. And the reason why they looked at private wells is because in towns itself, we do have water treatment systems and that water is being treated. Whereas private wells, people who rely on home wells in rural areas, like on gravel roads and such, we have a lot of our community members who live in rural areas on the reservation. And we were realizing that none of them knew the water quality of the water that they were drinking. And so we took it upon ourselves to really understand what that looks like for them and connect that to community health. So the team is made up of 6 individuals. I'm the youngest member and the most newly joined member. So I'm very fortunate that they allowed me to be a part of their team. And together we published a number of articles and still continue to do research to this day. One of the main areas that we've focused on, like I mentioned, was water. And water is actually the most pressing issue. It's the biggest environmental health challenge that we have on the Crow Reservation, specifically waterborne contaminants. We have heavy metals, we have PFAS, but we also have a huge issue with microbiology, specifically pathogens, and those actually pose the greatest risk. And so we have also challenges that have been impacted and increased by climate change. And so we started to really think about how climate change might impact us as a community and how it might influence the findings and the results that we have already been able to figure out. And so we work really hard to also try to address the infrastructure, not only infrastructure at private homes, but the infrastructure of the water treatment center in Crow Agency, and other towns on our reservation. And so this is just a snapshot of some of that work that the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee has been able to do. One of the things that we do not have that our work is hoping to influence is a climate change adaptation plan. We know that climate change has been impacting us, and we know that it is getting worse and worse. And so, our hope is that collectively, all of our research will contribute to an adaptation plan. We know that funding and resources are a huge, huge effort that needs to be made between us, not only as our steering committee, but also for our tribal nation. And so a lot of our systems are antiquated, they're old, they're out of date, and they're failing our homes, they're failing our treatment systems. And it's been really, really difficult to get things repaired. So we've been doing our best to use the data and the research to write grants in order to fix these problems that create a ripple effect in our community. We have no environmental enforcement on our reservation, which is something that we are also pushing for when it comes to water quality, when it comes to air quality. These are all things that impact one another. And so we really, really are making efforts and strides to make sure that all of these points are touched on so we can collectively work together to ensure that our community health and our environmental health are getting better. So, shifting into a little bit of the traditional ecological knowledge, I bring this up because the article I'll be talking about is relying on traditional ecological knowledge. And so, for me, I really, really love this quote by Dr. Robin Kimmerer. And Dr. Kimmerer is a very well-known scholar who has wrote multiple books and focuses on environmental health. And so I wanted to share this quote. It's my favorite quote out of her book, and I felt like it really resonated with me the most because I am a PhD student. And so I'll quickly read this quote for you. I want to help, but I am a little wary. Sweetgrass is not an experimental unit for me, it's a gift. There is a barrier of language and meaning between science and traditional knowledge. Different ways of knowing, different ways of communicating. I'm not sure I want to force the teachings of grass into the tight uniform of scientific thinking and technical writing that is required of the academy. The introduction, literature review, hypothesis, methods, results, discussion, conclusions, acknowledgments, and references cited. But I've been asked on behalf of Sweetgrass, and I know my responsibility. To be heard, you must speak the language of the one you want to listen. I smile when I hear my colleagues say, I discovered X. That's kind of like Columbus claiming to have discovered America, but it was here all along. It's just that he didn't know. Experiments are not about discovery, but about listening and translating the knowledge of other beings. I feel like this quote really just makes that connection between Western science and traditional knowledge and why they're so different, and really kind of just like lays out a perfect example of how TEK comes into play in the scholarly academic world. So this Venn diagram is another way to look at the difference between indigenous sciences and Western sciences. So the four main areas are ontologies, epistemologies, axiologies, and methodologies. And so these areas on the sides of the Venn diagram, you can see the differences between Western science and indigenous science. And it really comes down to a matter of being subjective or objective. Subjective meaning that what we know is based on our experiences and feelings, whereas being objective is more about the data, the evidence, the hard facts. And Indigenous sciences really encompasses many different things for knowledge to become passed on through generations. And one thing for me that I always have to remember is that our knowledges and who we are as people are not static. We're dynamic, we're adaptive people. Our languages and our knowledges are always adapting to our surroundings and what we experience in this world. And so I always think about at what point does our knowledge today become traditional knowledge? Because it is based on experiences, it is based on best practices. And so for me, as a contemporary Apsalogan woman, I'm always thinking about how the role that I play is going to influence the knowledge and the understanding of who we are as Absolga people in the future. And I also have an understanding that the roles of our ancestors, the roles of our people, 100 years ago is not that long ago. The early 1900s is not that long ago, but we kind of idolize them. We think of them as heroes, or at least I tend to. I think of them as people who knew everything, who knew the way, but they were also adaptive people. They were human, they were learning, and their knowledge eventually became knowledge that we live by. And so we also have to understand that we are those people, but in a different time. And so I always try to put myself back into that position and know that we are dynamic living people and that we're still here today creating our knowledges that we will pass down to our future generations. And so the article that I want to speak with you today is called Change Rippling Through Our Waters and Cultures. And we did a series of interviews with elders. We were able to create a list of questions related to climate change, relating to water, relating to weather, to animals, to the land, basically a wide range of questions. And we interviewed about 30 elders and we did a thematic analysis and tried to really find common themes. So we brought together the qualitative research, but then we brought together some of the data from Western science. So historical data like your climate data, trying to really match what our people have been experiencing to what the data actually says. And we've been able to put this together and really get an understanding of how things have changed throughout the years. I also want to note that most of the elders that were interviewed are passed on now. And so I really, really take this study and these interviews that we were able to do and to analyze. I really, really take that to heart because these were people who were sharing their knowledge, and to hear their voices still to this day is something that I really value. So we'll get right into the first theme. And so I'll have the themes on the screen and then I'm gonna read a quote from an interview from our interviews from the study itself. So bear with me. So we have the first theme, we have winters are milder. The first quote we have is, I think that the winters are different. There are fewer days that are sub-zero that I would observe. It seems to me that I used to count on a month of sub-zero weather, maybe 6 weeks, especially in January and February, and now not before Christmas or not before the holiday or the New Year. I remember a lot more snow, but maybe it's just because of the hard work that you have to do when there is snow. So we know that winters are not as colder. We're not getting as much snow as we used to get. I think the last time we had a really large snowfall where it really impacted our daily lives was back in 2017. The snow is not as deep. There's also a story about snowdrifts, and how drifts were not as high and drifts are not as common anymore, which was interesting to me that the elder brought up drifting because I recently learned about some research that a student was doing related to drifts and water and how that impacts economy. So I thought that was really cool that an elder really pointed out drifts and drifting isn't as common anymore. The next one we have is spring ice breakup becoming ice melt. The quote we have is, "Ice breakup is a rare commodity. I recall a time when they would float down the river on ice chunks that were about 9 inches thick and the size of a car hood. Ice jams haven't occurred for years. The ice breakups don't happen like they used to, and if they do, the timing is off." And so for us as Upsala people, the ice breakup or the ice jams actually sparks and is an indicator of when we start a ceremony. Ice breakup is really significant to the Old Warrior Society, and when there's no ice breakups or ice jams, it really impacts the timing of that ceremony. And so not only is it impacting what's happening on the landscape, but it's also impacting us culturally. The next one we have is irregular weather patterns. And so the quote we have is, "Winter is coming later. Snowfall is coming later in the fall. The freezing period for the fall is coming later, so the leaves are falling later as well. Warmer temperatures in the fall, decrease in precipitation for the spring, indicated by the amount of mud outside. Snowpack in the mountains is melting sooner, so you are able to go into the mountains in June when we would usually be able to go up in July." And so for us as Upsalaga, we have people who are able to use different signs of plants, of the moon, of clouds, of the behaviors of animals to indicate weather, to predict what weather will be like. And so one of the indicators that we have was what we have here is indicators of cooler weather, like the bees, birds, and when deers group together, and the timing of sunlight. And so, because these behaviors are changing due to irregular weather patterns, it's harder to predict what the weather will be like. And one example of that is the Tobacco Society ceremony. The Tobacco Society is really important to Uppsala people. We're the only indigenous people in the world who have the Tobacco Society. And the Tobacco Society would use weather as a way to start their ceremonies or even to have ceremonies. And so one individual mentioned that during one of the ceremonies, they had all four seasons during that ceremony, and that they never seen that before, and it sparked a lot of concern for them. We're also noticing that birds are not returning or not leaving at certain times, which is also an indicator of winter coming and going. And then the plants themselves, they're not able to detect these rapid changes that are happening all the time, so it's becoming more difficult to use plants as a way to predict even the winter itself. So, for example, the amount of berries on a tree, it's hard to use that as an indicator to predict what kind of winter we're going to have. Next, we have severe spring flooding. So they're becoming more frequent, and our elder says that floodwater came through their houses and that house is condemned. For people, that is such a hardship because we just don't have money to relocate and move. So they just had to let their house dry out and they had to move back in, even with the same carpet. So that was a community health concern. So the last major floods that we had happen were in 1978, 2007, and 2011. And I remember the 2011 flood. You can see a photo from that flood here, and that literally put the whole town of Crow Agency underwater. It impacted not only the water treatment center and the town, but it also impacted people's home wells. With flooding, you're getting these contaminated, dirty waters that are going into the wells itself that pose health risks to the people who rely on these waters in their home wells. And so the spring floods are seemingly to become more frequent in our area. And for us, we are trying better to prepare for these floods because most of our towns do live right along the banks of the river and some of the houses and areas are along these floodplains, so we have to be better prepared for these events that happen because they're becoming more frequent as the years go by. Next, we have less rainfall. We are losing the annual precipitation that we enjoyed in the years that have gone by. All we can do is just have memories and hope that eventually the cycle will come back to that time when we had ample moisture and we were at leisure with plant life, berry picking, root gathering, and other ceremonial activities that go on here year after year. One of the things that we've noticed is our springs are drying up. In areas where we know we have springs, there's no longer water running there anymore. And so one example of that is Chief Crazy Head. He noted an area an of a place where they would berry pick all the time and there was a spring there. But where this location is, that spring is no longer there. And so that was of concern to one of our chiefs. Then we also had chiefs who, sorry, we had warriors, specific special warriors who would go out and look at the landscape and look for camps where there would be water. And so they had areas where they would come back to where they knew water was there. They knew where it was located. And when they would return to these areas and to these camps, the water was no longer there. And so just being in a drought-prone area, specifically in the Powder River Basin or in our area, rainfall is heavily impacting the recharge of these springs and the groundwater around here. Another evidence, another observation that our people have noticed is when they go into Sundance, they notice that when they're in Sundance and they're in there for 4 days without any water, without any food, and the sun is blaring on them, they would use the ground as a way to stay cool. And the ground would hold moisture itself, and they would stay cool with that. But people are noticing that the ground is not holding as much moisture or the we're not getting as much rainfall, so the ground stays moist. And so the ground is getting hotter and drier, and it's impacting people who are in Sundance, and they can't use the ground as a way to stay cool anymore. And so I thought that was a really interesting observation that people have noticed too. And we also have longer and hotter summers. We're getting more days with more frequent days with temperatures over 100, which is not normal for our area. And one of our elders said, "We have a few days of hot weather in March, then some in April, but the hot weather comes in June and lasts until September. It's longer, the heat, it appears to me to be longer and hotter and way more uncomfortable." Because of less snow, because of less water, um, our plants, our landscape, our people are feeling the impacts of these higher temperatures. Like I mentioned, we're in a drought-prone area. We have been, and with these hotter, drier temperatures, it's impacting all life around here. And so people would even think about the timing of snow and the timing of water, but the summers have seemed to be longer, like now, like we're getting 85-degree weather at the end of September, which is really unusual for us. Another aspect that we've been seeing is increasing wildfires. This is the most recent wildfire that happened on our reservation was Little Bull Elk Canyon wildfire. This happened in the canyon in our Bighorn Mountains. But last year there was a wildfire on the Wyoming side, but it was making its way up to the reservation line In my lifetime, I hadn't seen a fire in the Bighorn River, or sorry, in the Bighorn Mountains like that. And so for me to experience that fire, and not had seen one in my entire 30 years, was kind of scary. But we also know that fires have a natural process too, but we're getting to see an increase of them. And so our elders said, there are more fires nowadays, and they're more severe and more widespread, and they do more damage. To me, it's all obvious and apparent that we, in fact, are in global warming. When it rains, then the mud slides and washes everything away. And for us in Montana, when it comes to air quality, the biggest air quality challenge we have is particulate matter and particulate matter that comes from burning fires. And so we have people who have asthma, who have respiratory problems, and these fires are really impacting our people itself, especially when they're in close proximity to our reservation. But this past year, we've been seeing a lot of the smoke from fires up north, specifically in Canada and in the Northwest. Next, we have loss of riparian berries. I'm a berry picker. I love June berries. I make sure that we harvest them every year. Love June berries, choke cherries. They're my favorite berries ever. And so our elder said, there used to be a bunch of patches of raspberries, and now they only know of one or two patches. The choke cherries aren't as delicious, and they aren't as sweet. None of them are as sweet as they used to be. That might have something to do with the decrease in bees, or the frost and thawing period, or it could be the late precipitation, because if you are not getting the water, then you are not growing as early in the season. Another area that our berries and our plants have been impacted by has been the influx of invasive species. Russian olive is a huge invasive species that we have around here. It's a really huge problem, but we also have other plants that impact our natural traditional plants. Um, you can't find them in areas where you used to find them. You have families who would camp, who would go and like make a whole, celebration event out of harvesting berries, harvesting plants, medicinal plants, but also plants that you can eat. And where people would used to go, there you're not seeing them as plentiful anymore. And that has been a huge problem. There are also people have a hard time sharing the location of areas where they have berries. And so it's kind of like people's little secrets where they know that berries grow. And so I don't blame them. I mean, because we have a loss of these berries, they want to ensure that they have access to them. So I don't blame them, but it just goes to show that they're not as bountiful anymore. And then another thing that was mentioned was sage, or plants that are used in ceremony are becoming a little bit harder to find. So that wraps up the article itself and some of the information and knowledge that our elders shared with us for our article. You can read more about these in more depth in the article that was mentioned earlier. I did want to share this slide with you. These are some of our traditional plants that we use. I talked about the Tobacco Society and this really, really important society that is still used today. We had our own version of the tobacco plant. We call it Ichichia. The tobacco plant is the reason why we are here in the Bighorn Mountains. It is what brought us to our promised land. And then we also have Bejewalajiste, which means the flower buffalo won't eat. I don't know the actual English name of that. I just know the Crow name and the Crow translation, but that plant actually is the medicine of one of my great great grandparents, and they would use that medicine. We also have Iza, which is bare root. That is what I like to smudge with. We can also use it to help with respiratory problems. Like, I don't know if you've noticed in my voice, but I'm coming down from a little bit of a cold, but I would use bare root and tea, and then I would also chew on bare root to help with my respiratory system. We also have iha, which is turnip. We can make that into a soup. We have shushu, which is mint. We make that into a tea, or you could use it for other ways to eat with as well. And then we have the Juneberry, which I mentioned before in the previous slide. It's my favorite berry to eat. It's very, very delicious. It's sweet, but you have to pick them at the right time. But yeah, love June berries. I love to make this June berry orange cake. My favorite. And then we have yarrow, which the Crow translation is prairie dog tail, and yarrow is used for infections, and is used in a variety of different ways. So those are just the names of a few of the plants that we use as Apsalagat people. I also wanted to share this slide. Now that you've heard more about some of the impacts that we've been feeling due to climate change, and then you can look at this diagram and think about how might, for example, the EPA set standards or set regulations. And you're thinking of, the EPA has this one track mind of how people might be exposed to a contaminant. And you can see that in this image on the left side where you're thinking someone is directly drinking contaminated water, on a hike versus another way might an indigenous person be exposed. So, for a person who lives right along the river, who might harvest meat, harvest fish, whether that's or if it's elk, or other animals that drink directly from the water or eat directly from the plants, you're seeing these other exposure pathways that a human might be impacted by and might be exposed to, because we do utilize the land and are exposed in many different ways. And this diagram is actually from a study from one of my co-advisors at the University of Arizona. And so I always like to show this just to show you the different exposure pathways that our people are subjected to. Some of the ways we are addressing these, we, of course, as the steering committee works together, we are applying for grants, applying for ways to improve our infrastructure, doing more awareness and education for our people so they understand what's going on, so they know what is happening, what they're breathing, what they're consuming, what they're being exposed to. Our education is a huge component to the work that we do. We also have the Upsala Energy Justice Project. I'm a part of that team, but we just recently transformed into our own nonprofit that wants to work to address environmental justice issues. We are having discussions on a climate adaptation plan. We have the Biwa Chajai Collective, who I also lead in trying to help our young women understand the environmental challenges we face so they become better aware so they can teach their kids, teach their families. And I'm a strong believer that it's a ripple effect. If we start with one individual who will go impact a family, that family will impact their neighbors, their larger families, and then so on and so forth. It'll eventually impact the community and then our tribal nation. And so I'm a strong believer in that ripple effect. I also am working so hard to obtain treatment estate status, which is a way for our tribal nation to set our own water quality standards. So I'm hopeful that my research and the data that I collect will add to the effort of obtaining treatment estate status so we can set our own water quality standards. And then everything that the steering committee does is to focus on the youth to bring up our younger generation and hoping they become scientists and the researchers that we need to continue to do this work. So I've talked about land theft, talked about Crow people, talked about me, my research, talked about in the climate change study that we did together at the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee. And now I'll shift into a little bit of this heart work. Everything is works all together. Who I am, what I do is it's intersected with many different parts of my life. And so I call this section my heart work. Everything I do is to give back to my people, to give back to the land that raised me. And so I've done a plethora of different things. I love to write. I also have been on a number of podcasts, some webinars, um, and these are just screenshots, snapshots of some of the things I've been able to do. In particular, related to climate change, I wrote a photo essay on Crow Cowboys, and it's a story of responsibility, respect, and resilience, where I interviewed and had a discussion with the Yellowtail family, specifically Stephen and Wells Yellowtail, who are a very well-known multi-generational ranching family, and they're individuals who are on the land every single day, caring for their animals in no matter what element, no matter what weather they're in, they're out there caring for their animals, and they're the ones who first hand see what the changes of our climate and our landscape looks like. So feel free to check out that photo essay. I was really proud to be able to capture some of the images, but also the storyline from Stephen Yellowtail, who is a younger generation Crow Cowboy who is continuing to do that work. And he's taking on the role that his great grandparents have been able to do. And so his legacy is still living. The Yellowtail ranching legacy is living on through him. I've also published in High Country News related to my research. I also am focused on a lot of the cultural aspect of what I do. Everything's interconnected, everything goes back to the land and where we are in this land. And so, yeah, this is just a snapshot of some of the awareness and education that I hope is being well resonated out there. And so to go back to the involvement that I do, I love working with the youth and women in my community, specifically the youth, because everything that we do is for them. I am all about uplifting our younger generation. I was able to publish a children's book with our elementary school students here on the reservation based on their Crow names. So really just finding creative and unique ways to keep our youth involved. I also work for the Indigenous Correspondence Program. I am all about storytelling, all about creativity and communicating our science. And so I run that program, and we are in year 4, and we have correspondence, a cohort every year, and they have produced amazing stories, all coming from their own heart, all coming from their own communities. And that is one project that I am really happy to be a part of. I not only work in water quality or environmental research, but I'm also in the energy sector. Um, and then I also love sharing more about our culture with our youth. And of course, going back to our parade sets and who I am and what family I come from. Very happy to show that with our younger generations. This is some of the museum work that I've been able to do. One thing that I've noticed is our crow culture, our crow beadwork, our creations are locked in vaults all across the world. And the fact that our beadwork has been one of the most sought out beadwork is kind of disturbing, but I understand why it was the most sought out. Our designs, the way we use our colors, it all comes from our understanding, our worldview of the landscape, also of cosmology. Everything is all interconnected to our environment. And the fact that I am in the environmental world and I can connect that to our culture and then our cultural material has been really amazing and really eye-opening. And everything that I do is to ensure that our generations have access to our cultural material, but also are able to create their own, and to carry on the legacies of their family and the craftsmanship of their family. I run the Bill Chajai Collective I mentioned earlier, working with young women so they have a better understanding of our environment, our landscape. We've worked together to learn more about what it means to be an Apsalagat woman. We put up teepees together. We visited Yellowtail Dam. We've been on the landscape. We did everything we could to build up the knowledge and to uplift our young women in our community. And I hope that they share what they've learned with their families and their children. I mentioned the Upsalaga Energy Justice Project. That project was put together through a nonprofit called Plenty Doors Community Development Corporation, who is another nonprofit, an organization that has been phenomenal in helping our community out in many different ways. They also work on infrastructure, water, sanitation, and hygiene, which is really important to that environmental work that we've been doing. So here on the Crow Reservation, we're trying really hard to collaborate with each other, to partner with each other, because there are so many needs. There are so many challenges that we face that not just one person or not just one organization can do all of it. Which brings me to the next point of our group, the Upsalagat Energy Justice Project, transforming and creating our own nonprofit. Our nonprofit is called Upsalagat Myo, and the translation of that is collectively together as Upsalagat, we're helping oneself. A more simpler translation is crows being independent. And so together, we are focusing on community and individual capacity building, environmental justice, and cultural preservation. And right now, some of the work we've been focused on is energy efficiency in homes on the reservation, ensuring that we reduce the electricity burden that our people face, but also trying to think about bringing clean energy, renewable energy onto the reservation. It's a long road, and we've been on this journey together for a while now, but it's been really awesome to have young Upsalagat people go out, obtain their education, and do everything they can to return back home to give back to our community. Like I mentioned, like create a community in which we can thrive in. And so very, very happy to be a part of this team and to do this work. And so we've been applying to grants. The most recent grant that we received was to focus on energy efficiency. But now we are focusing, adding another project and trying to focus on food sovereignty and food security on the Crow Reservation. This is a cool project I was a part of. I'm the narrator. Shameless plug. Watch if you can, if you have time. It's Life in the Land, and it's focusing on the Mighty Few, which is the district I come from, Igoshtagapat Chaja. I'm the narrator of this film. I wrote the opening poem of the film, and this is where my heart is, where I was raised, and where I hope to live the rest of my good life. So yeah, I just wanted to share this with you. Feel free to watch it if you'd like. It talks about some of the work we've been doing as a community to create a better place for our generation, our future generations, and for the people that currently live there now. So just wanted to share that with you. And to conclude, everything that I've done, everything that I do has been to end up here. This is the view from my home site overlooking the Little Bighorn River and looking at the Bighorn Mountains. This is where all the roads have led to, and I've worked so hard to be where I am and to come back to the place that raised me. And so, thank you so, so much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit more about who I am and the work that I do. I have many, many people to thank. Here are my acknowledgements. First and foremost, just want to thank the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee for bringing me along, their team, and for always supporting me, and for all of the other individuals, organizations, foundations who believe in me and support the work that I do. I can provide sources upon request. Feel free to email me if you would like. And thank you so much. Aho gajila.